Thanks, Terry. Well, this morning we're going to be looking at the book of 2 Kings today, chapter 6, verses 18 to 23. Hear the word of God. Once, when the king of Aram was at war with Israel, he took counsel with his officers. He said, "At such and such a place shall be my camp." But the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, "Take care not to pass this place, because the Arameans are going down there." The king of Israel sent word to the place of which the man of God spoke. More than once or twice he warned such a place, so that it was on the alert. The mind of the king of Aram was greatly perturbed because of this. He called his officers and said to them, "Now tell me, who among us sides with the king of Israel?" Then one of his officers said, "No one, my lord king. It is Elisha, the prophet in Israel, who tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedchamber." He said, "Go and find where he is. I will send and seize him." He was told, "He is in Dothan." So he sent horses and chariots there and a great army. They came by night and surrounded the city. When an attendant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city. His servant said, "Alas, master, what shall we do?" He replied, "Do not be afraid, for there are more with us than there are with them." Then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." So the Lord opened the eyes of the servant, and he saw the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. When the Arameans came down against him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, "Strike these people, please, with blindness." So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Elisha said to them, "This is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek." And he led them to Samaria. Samaria, of course, being in Israelite territory. As soon as they entered Samaria, Elisha said, "O Lord, open the eyes of these men so that they may see." The Lord opened their eyes, and they saw that they were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, "Father, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them?" He answered, "No. Did you capture with your sword and your bow those whom you want to kill? Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink, and let them go to their master." So he prepared for them a great feast. After they ate and drank, he sent them on their way, and they went to their master. And the Arameans no longer came raiding into the land of Israel. Thanks be to God for his word to us. So a while ago, this was quite some time ago actually, but I took a week and I watched as much television as I possibly could. Now that is not a spiritual discipline or anything. It was actually something I had to do. It was part of an assignment that I had for this continuing education class I was working on at the time. I had to analyze various forms of popular entertainment, and so that was part of the assignment. And as I did that, I realized that TV just isn't the same as it used to be. Now, I don't actually watch very much TV anymore. I guess I'm more of a streamer at this stage. And I guess TV has never really been that good. But the last few years, it just seems like anyone can get on TV. We've got all of these talk shows now and all kinds of this weird reality TV kind of stuff that's on. And you know you'll be surfing around if you have not moved on to streaming, if you're, clicking your remote and you're surfing from channel to channel. Sometimes they'll put the title of the topic of some of these shows on the bottom of the screen, right? Like on the left. And as you're switching, you'll see these weird things pop up about what they're talking about. They'll say things like, one person, 1,000 tattoos. Or they'll never wear clothes again, or stuff, weird stuff, right? And yeah, if you pause, there out of fascination maybe, or whatever, you're sure to see a fight. right? I mean, someone maybe will throw a chair, or someone will get restrained by the show's security, or maybe you'll land on a spot that's just completely bleeped out because they can't air it, whatever it is. And when you see that sort of thing, if you see that sort of thing, what do you think, right? What I think is, are these people for real? Where do they find these people, right? I can't just conceive of the world that they must live in to end up on a circus like the TV show that they've come onto, let alone actually throw a chair on national TV. Now, I wouldn't be surprised, of course, if some of these shows are actually fake shows, but the way that these guests behave on some of these shows is hard to comprehend, and I think the opposite might also be true. It might be hard for them to kind of understand the world I live in either. My view of reality just doesn't fit with what I see on these shows. Now, do you ever find yourself in that kind of situation? Maybe for whatever reason you are just kind of scratching your head and thinking, I didn't know this is the way the world works, you know? Our passage in 2 Kings is about reality. And it's about how the world really works. It's got people in it who view the world in a way that is completely different from how Elisha sees the world. Elisha, of course, is the main character in the passage, and the text is about a world that cannot conceive of another way to live other than what has always been presented to it. It's about a world that is missing out on a more excellent way to live because it is too blind to see what is real. Now, some writers and thinkers believe that there are really two worlds available to people. This is, of course, just one way of looking at our place in the world, and it's a little philosophical this morning. Each of us can choose to live in one of two worlds. The first world is the world around us that we see. It's a world of success and power and authority. Sometimes it's a world of materialism or consumerism. It's a world that we can calculate and work in. Maybe we can try to gain some sort of self-value from it. But if we're honest with ourselves, we all come to a point where we realize that the external world is not enough. Then we have the option to go into the world of the self. And that's the second world. We can retreat into ourselves, sort of our mental and emotional world. We can disengage from the outside world around us, and we can dwell in our own private thought life, but that world too has limits. And we always will come to a lonely place where we realize that there has to be more to reality than just ourselves and the world around us. Those two options, the outside world and our inner selves, seem to be the only options that we have as people. Now, the good news is that even though these worlds are real, there is another world that is even more real and enters into our world to open up our eyes and set us free from those two options, because we know that those two options are dead ends. Our 2 Kings passage is about the construction of a third option, an alternative world. It's the real world of God where we are given the eyes to see the true nature of reality, and we even look back from this third world with a certainty, like we do when we see some bizarre reality TV, that there is more to the world than what we see with our eyes or think with our minds. Now, today we're concluding our series on Old Testament passages that show us we can trust God. And oh man, let me tell you, this is the passage to end on. Because not only is God trustworthy, but our lack of trust in God is not even rooted in reality. When we fail to trust God, it's because we don't see what is real we get stuck in the world around us, or we're stuck in our own thought life. But there is a third option. Now, I really love, I'm indebted to really Walter Brueggemann, who's a former seminary professor at Columbia Seminary. And he's done a lot of work on this passage, and he's the one that notices these worlds, and he describes them so well, but he also asks the important question: how do we escape the trap of these two options, the world or our inner selves? How do we open up our eyes and participate in this wonderful third option, this new world that God has available to us? Well, this is something we learn from our passage. So checking out the passage, in the first few verses, we've got the king of Aram, and we have the king of Israel, and they are at war. War being a typical activity in our world. The Aramean king is counseling with his generals, and he's setting up an ambush for the Israelites. But someone who's not identified yet in the text, a man of God, the passage says, warns the king of Israel what the king of Aram and the Arameans plan. The man of God has some ability to reveal the secret military activities of the Arameans. And so naturally, the king of Aram tries to put an end to this security leak. Somehow, the enemy is learning of his plans, and so he assumes naturally that he's got a double agent of some kind. He's got a traitor on his staff, and he starts acting just like you would expect a king to act. He issues commands: stop the leak, get control, secure the borders, seize him. The king wants control, and a king should have control in the world that the king knows. So his advisors come along and they tell him, you know what, there is no leak. It's this man of God who has some way of knowing what they are planning, and the king can't understand it. Elisha, they say, can even hear what the king says in private. Elisha's a prophet who lives in a city. He has no army, no worldly authority. Yet the king of Aram issues these orders to seize him, and he sends this enormous army to do it. The king is actually ludicrous in the story because he sends such a great army against a nobody, but that's what happens. And when Elisha's name is finally mentioned in the passage, this nobody takes over the whole story. He's the central figure, while entire armies and kings are just acted upon by him. Nonetheless, this army marches to Elisha's city, and it surrounds it, and that's really when the action begins, and that's where this new world gets really revealed. Elisha's servant gets up in the morning, and he sees the house, and the city is surrounded by the great Aramean army. Troops, horses, chariots, the most powerful weapons in the world. It is a terrifying sight, and the servant cries out, "What will we do?" Now, think for a minute. When was the last time you had that thought? When was the last time you asked, "Lord, what will I do?" We've been talking about this all summer. When have you come to the end of yourself, unsure of what is to come, or unable to live with joy maybe because you're worried about what might come next? It isn't always easy for us to trust God. So this little house is surrounded by this massive and absolutely terrifying army. The servant undoubtedly believes that he's about to die. Everything in the external world, everything in the world of the self for this servant shows him that he has everything to fear. So the servant asks what we have all asked at various points in our lives: "Lord, what will I do?" The servant asks this of Elisha, and this is this critical turning point in the text. And Elisha simply prays. He doesn't ask the Lord to do something specific. He doesn't pray for a miracle. He just asks that his servant would see the truth. He asks if his servant could see the alternative world, the real world. Elisha tells the servant some of the most unforgettable words in all of Scripture. Do not be afraid. There are more with us than there are with them. Now, this doesn't make any sense to the servant, right? He's already calculated the numbers and he's seen the army. But when his eyes are opened and he sees the real world, maybe for the first time in his life, what's really there is a world that the king doesn't think is possible. All over the mountain around Elisha are horses and chariots of light and fire. This is not a metaphor. We want to think like the king. We want to insist that this isn't possible. It's only an analogy to the power of God in our lives. But that is not in this text. And that's not how this text would have been read when it was written. This is real. But the world around us doesn't want us to know it. Elisha prays that his servant will see. Not that his servant will see something specific, but will see in general. See for real. And what he sees is that the power base of the world is not what he thought it was. The king's army is insignificant next to an army of what must be angels, supernatural beings. Later on in the text we read, and we learn even more as we read about this new world that's opening before our eyes. It's a world where royal power is meaningless. The invading army is struck with blindness. The servant, gets to see, but this invading army, it becomes blind. They're defeated without a fight. They're simply rendered meaningless. The king of Israel wants to come and he wants to execute this invading army that's now helpless. But did you notice that the king has to ask permission? He has to go to this nobody and ask permission. It's a great story. But instead, Elisha orders this feast to be given, and they're sent back home. This world that Elisha is a part of is a world of trust and peace. It's not what anyone expects. And it brings this glorious alternative to war, death, and control, and anxiety. The Aramean army comes as a serious threat, but then they encounter the real world, and they go home in peace. So how do we see this real world? How do we become transformed in such a way that we get to enter into that world that God has for us? Well, who do we identify with in the story? Who has the transformation? Who sees the world? For us, the key figure in the passage has got to be the servant. The servant was blind in a sense. He can only see the world the way he's been taught to see it his whole life. And we can be just like that. We've all been brought up in this world around us. We've been taught things about the world that are true, and we've been taught things about the world that aren't true. We've been raised to some degree to take the world for what it is, and maybe even to be embarrassed by a story like this. An invisible alternative world. It sounds like something on the Sci-Fi Channel. How can we see this real world that God has made for us when we have been brought up like that? Well, how's the servant see it? He sees it because Elisha shows it to him. If we want to see and participate in this real world, this world that matters, then we need to hang out with people like Elisha. Elisha is teaching his servant and he's praying for his servant. And Elisha does this so that his servant will grow in faith, so that his servant can see a reality that even kings cannot see. If we're not satisfied with the world, we can see that there is even more when we are taught and prayed for by mature Christians. We've got to be shown the way. If we don't have an Elisha type person in our life, then we might be as blind as the Aramean king, stuck on the old Jerry Springer show in a sad world of our own making, missing what is real. We might be as fearful as the servant was in the beginning of the passage. But if we have an Elisha in our life, or several even Elishas in our lives, our eyes will be opened and we will see the angel army of fire. Maybe you are an Elisha type person for someone else right now, but even then, we all need someone to guide us along our spiritual journey. In our day, I don't think there's any question that Christian education opportunities like small groups and Sunday school classes and Bible studies and things like that are probably the most prominent ways that Christians experience growth and see the truth. That is so true that I don't even hesitate when I say that if we aren't involved in a Bible study or a mentor relationship, or if we don't go to Sunday school or a small group, just one of those opportunities, then we may not see the real world. We might not have an Elisha in our life. Simple church attendance isn't enough for that. We might not grow and we might not have our eyes open if we don't have an Elisha in our life. If he had been alone, the servant in our passage would have been overcome by terror. But Elisha shows him that God can open his eyes to the truth, to the reality, that we have nothing to fear. We have no one to fear. We can see the external world. We can create a world of the self, but the real world is the reality that God is a God of angel armies of fire and light, where the power of the things we fear is rendered meaningless. God goes before us. God stands behind us. And so Elisha says, do not be afraid. There are more with us than there are with them. And the God of angel armies is revealed. Amen. I'd like to